All right, Paul. So thank you very much for joining us today on Urban Jungles Radio. I'm very excited to speak to you because in terms of pangolins, and you are definitely pangolin people from what I can see. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on your interest in pangolins and what it is that you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
About 5 years ago, I got involved in pangolins, and back then, pangolins weren't even popping up in the media. You know, you talk with most people, and nobody had ever even heard of a pangolin. So I got together with a group of other conservationists, and we started SavePangolins.org, which was the first website ever dedicated to penguins. And our goal was to raise global awareness about pangolins and the illegal trade that's pretty much driving them to extinction. And in addition to that, we did some support efforts with on-the-ground organizations like Conservation International in Cambodia, and we organized a international conference and workshop for people in the Cardamom Mountains, which is an important place for penguins.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys work specifically with certain species or regions, or are you kind of a worldwide project as far as the pangolins themselves go?
Yeah, sure. So there's 8 species of pangolins, 4 in Southeast Asia and 4 in Africa. Back when I first started getting involved in pangolin work, our target species were the Asian species. 2 of them are listed as endangered, but it's probably a safe bet that they're all severely threatened. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is that since we've been working throughout Southeast Asia, we've noticed that a lot of the Asian species are in such rapid decline and in high demand for the illegal trade for their body parts. Their meat is a delicacy, and their scales are used in traditional Chinese medicine. And what's interesting is, and it's really alarming, but the more that the Asian species are getting sort of cleaned out of their home ranges, there's more of a demand being put on African species. So nowadays, I think, we're working with all 8 species, and we're hoping to find out as much as we can to stop the illegal trade before they start taking a major toll on the African species.
And that kind of goes to speak volumes about the demand that we're starting to see for them, where I would assume now, from what I understand, China kind of being ground zero, the animals locally are almost extirpated, and then now we're seeing demand as far away as Africa for the Asian market still. Is that correct?
Yeah, so their seizures are taking place, so these are points where we know pangolins are being caught through the illegal trade. They're happening throughout Southeast Asia and even further afield, but data is showing that the overwhelming demand is heading towards China, or is coming out of China.
Right.
So most of these species, like for example, in 2013, I think in September, there were 4 tons of frozen pangolins that were, found in a shipment in Vietnam, China bound. In August, there were 6 tons of pangolins being smuggled. I think that was from Indonesia, destined towards China. So, the pangolins are consumed in a lot of different nations, but the largest demand is coming from China.
Wow, that's crazy. Realistically, is it too late? For some of the Asian species, how critical is the situation right now for pangolins?
So right now, two of the 8 species are listed as endangered. Some of the work that I'm doing in conjunction with the Pangolin Specialist Group under IUCN is to really ascertain how many pangolins are left in the wild and what those wild populations, what they're doing. I'd like to think that it's not too late. I do think that a lot of everyday people can put enough consumer pressure on things to help turn the tide. We've seen success with shark fin, where really effective sort of public media campaigns have turned things around and helped people realize that sort of the food choices or the medicine choices they're making in their daily lives really does have an impact on some of this biodiversity. So I hope that with a little more data, a little more understanding about pangolins, how many are left, and the behavior and ecology, we can turn things around before it's too late. Now the question is whether we can do that in time.
Now, from what I understand, there's relatively little known about pangolin, not conservation, but pangolin natural history as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's changing? I mean, is there research going on right now in situ on these animals?
Yeah, there is. It's, again, just in the last few years, there seem to be a few research projects cropping up and a few students in PhD programs and other researchers that are coming into the field to actually learn about not just their natural history and their behavior, but also really trying to break apart the whole illegal trade, and so that we can understand, the channels that smugglers are using, where they're coming from, where they're heading to. But there are a few researchers out there, and hopefully they can provide some of that critical data that I was talking about that will help kind of illuminate the bigger picture, and then enable some of the conservation programs to get underway to turn things around.
Do you know who's buying them? I mean, who is the pangolin consumer as far as, at least an age group or because from what I understand, it's really not a long-standing tradition to eat pangolin. Am I correct?
Yeah, actually, I don't know how long the tradition of consuming pangolins goes back, but I do know that with sort of with an emerging middle class in certain Asian countries, there's a lot more money and a lot more people that are not only able to afford pangolin meat, which is quite a delicacy, but also it's in a way it's a sign of their social status. I've heard a story from a colleague of mine who was in a restaurant and this showy, sort of flashy businessman was with a group, and he ordered a pangolin at the table, and I think it was a bit of a status symbol thing.
Right.
So they carted out this pangolin, a live pangolin, and they actually slaughtered it and served it at the table. And my colleague who's studying pangolins said it was quite an intense moment, to say the least.
You do. I mean, here you are, you study pangolins, and you're watching one get slaughtered a couple of feet away, let's say the equivalent of basically, popping bottles here in the U.S. with Cristal, like, I don't know if Chinese rappers are really popping too many pangolins or anything, but I mean, that's really tough to see that happening. I mean, kudos to your colleague for coming out of there in one piece, because I would probably personally have a hard time. I don't know.
So fortunately, he was smart enough where he knew that he had to, that he couldn't really intervene, that it wouldn't do anything in the bigger picture. So for him and his role as a researcher, he was able to sort of separate his personal emotions and be able to observe this situation and kind of glean a little bit of a data from it as far as like how this thing is happening in everyday life.
Yeah, which is definitely a great strategy, because I think we need to have a deep understanding of the cultural, roots of this before we can find a way around it. Along those lines of conservation, are there any refuges or preserves that are notable for working with pangolins right now? I mean, is anybody really working to help save the species in captivity per se, or at least in a monitored situation, aside from independent studies?
Sure. Now, pangolins are notoriously difficult to keep in captivity, and there have been very few successfully captive-raised pangolins in zoos and things like that. There are, however, a few rescue and rehabilitation centers in Southeast Asia that have done very well as far as providing a place to receive live pangolins that have been confiscated by customs officials, and then they help rehabilitate those pangolins and then return them to the wild. So there's one called the Anchor Center for Conservation Biodiversity, ACCB, in Cambodia. I really like the Carnivore Pangolin Conservation Program, which is CPCP, in Vietnam. And then more recently, the Conservation International set up a rehab center in Cambodia as well. And, they're good. This is sort of a first stop measure on the ground to work to ensure that sort of every individual that they receive can be looked after. Because a lot of the times, and this is something that's a huge problem, is that customs officials, they're seizing, these giant containers full of pangolins or cars with secret compartments full of pangolins. Some of them are still alive, right? And the customs officials don't necessarily have the resources or the training to know what to do with them. So that's why some of these rehab centers are really important, so that they can take those individuals and look after them, and then ideally, hopefully, return them to the wild.
Yeah, I've seen that it's unfortunately somewhat of a common situation where pregnant females will give birth while, being transported. And then, I've seen a couple of seizures where there are obviously newborn pangolins in there. And it's good to know that there's some outlet, hopefully, that can be reached for these animals to be returned in the wild. I know if these animals are being transported the ways that I've seen them, I can't imagine that. I should say that I can't imagine that their mortality rates are going to be through the roof, even if found alive. But at least knowing that there's some kind of an outlet to hopefully get them back out there, a little bit of a silver lining there.
Absolutely, and hopefully, it's one thing I'd like to see in the next couple of years is sort of an increase in the resources provided to wildlife authorities across Southeast Asia, so that they know how to handle receiving live pangolins, and they're able to actually get those back on their feet rather than just sort of turning them over back into the black market.
Right. So what are one of the things that the average person listening to this interview right now can do to get involved in helping out pangolins?
Sure. I think the best place to start is simply figuring out what a pangolin is and why it's so awesome and worth conserving. For years I constantly get the question, what is a pangolin? And if more people are able to answer that, then I think more people are going to have the awareness and the interest in the species, educate themselves, educate their friends, and then hopefully shed a little more light on this problem before pangolins slip away completely. So I think, public awareness is huge. So definitely find us, on our website, savepangolins.org. We're on Facebook and Twitter and all that. And then through our site, we highlight some of the on-the-ground efforts being done for conservation and research, including links to those rehabilitation centers that I mentioned, and then some of these other organizations that are really trying to break down the illegal trade in pangolins, figure out which are the most intense smuggling routes, so that hopefully we can pump more resources into putting pressure on them.
Absolutely. And talk about the poster child for a fascinating animal to introduce people to, because there's really no one that I've talked to who didn't know what a pangolin was, who either, Googled it or looked up on YouTube and saw it for the first time and just completely just had a jaw-dropping, reaction to what an amazingly unique and just almost unheard of animal this is. And that's kind of a shame. This is a tremendously fascinating animal. I mean, it's basically a living dinosaur in some ways.
It's such a cool animal. It's the closest thing we have to a living dinosaur, to a little dragon.
Right.
I mean, here's this small cat-sized mammal that's covered in scales. I mean, that's really cool. It's got these shells. It's got its own coat of armor. It walks around like a little artichoke almost. It's so cute. And and it provides an important ecological service too. They say one pangolin will eat 70 million insects in a year, so good for pest control. They have this insanely long tongue that's attached to their pelvis. The animal's full of cool fun facts,
Yeah.
and I think they're so great, and people should definitely know about them. And I think with that awareness comes sort of an interest in making sure that they don't slip away.
You have to get over to savethepangolins.org and check out the setup on the webpage. You'll definitely find all kinds of amazing information on these animals and some really fun stuff too, which I thought was cool, like coloring templates and all kinds of really cool little facts that you can use to wow people if you want to become an instant pangolin expert overnight, because the details are definitely there. And as Paul said, most importantly, just start your own little campaign on letting people know what it is, because anyone who is interested in these animals are going to do something to try to help. There's no way you can turn your back on them for sure. Here at Urban Jungles Radio, this weekend, in conjunction with World Pangolin Day, we are going to launch a campaign starting all year round, basically, to do our best to try to make people more aware of these amazing animals and the plight that they're currently facing. And so we will definitely be pointing everybody over to savethepangolins.org for more information. And I want to thank you and your partners and everybody who is a member of the organizations that you're working with for doing their part to save these amazing animals, because it would be a terrible shame if we lost pangolins. It would be just horrendous. This is such an amazing animal and so important in so many ways that we probably don't even realize yet. So I think we owe it to them at least to be a little more conscious of them. Paul, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about Save Pangolins and what we can do to help. For sure, if there's anything we can ever do here at Urban Jungles Radio to help you guys get the word out, let us know. We definitely want to help out. You guys are doing such a great thing.
Thank you so much, Danny. That's great. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for dedicating this show to pangolin.
PangoPalooza. Woo, happy World Pangolin Day.
Happy World Pangolin Day. Don't eat pangolins, people.
That's right. Pangolins are friends, not food.